Questions Zohan. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
To this NDP Liberal government, it's clear the Prime Minister is not worth the cost of housing. He created housing hell by doubling rents, mortgage payments, and the needed down payment. And as housing prices skyrocket, the greedy federal government rakes in the cash. The Prime Minister now collects more in taxes on the sale of a new home than the carpenter or electrician that actually builds the house. The solution? Our common sense plan to axe the federal sales tax on new homes. On an $800,000 home, this will save a homebuyer $40,000. So why not provide some much needed relief and axe the tax off of new homes?
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to see the Conservatives have taken some inspiration from our plan in removing the GST to help get more homes built. But what's completely unacceptable is how they say they're going to pay for it. And this is telling about their strategy across a range of policy areas. They want to cut the programs that are going to deliver housing for low-income and middle-class families today, just like they plan to cut the programs that are going to provide dental care for families who need it, like they plan to cut the programs that will deliver birth control to Canadian women for free, like the way that they oppose programs to support seniors with pensions, students with student loans, and families with the cost of raising kids. It's time to build, not cut.
Hear, hear. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, actually, the Liberals' own housing advisor said that the Liberal plan is, quote, turning out to be nothing more than a heist of tax dollars flowing from the feds to municipalities. They fund bureaucracy and photo ops, not build new homes. It used to be in this country that it took 25 years for the average family to pay off their house. Now it takes 25 years just to save up for the down payment. Our plan on an $800,000 home will save a new home buyer $2,200 a year in mortgage payments. $800,000 used to buy you a mansion. Now you're lucky if you get 4 walls and a roof in Toronto and Vancouver. So why not adopt our plan and axe the tax off of new homes?
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, when he says adopt their plan to cut the supports for cities who are going to build home, so plans to cut the money that's actually going to be build the infrastructure to make home building possible. He talks about bureaucracy. He must not have read the line in his own plan that says that they want to hire new bureaucrats just to run a snitch line if you don't like your neighbor's housing policies. They came up with this stuff on the backside of a napkin after Googling housing for 5 minutes. When you actually talk to the people who have experience building homes, they will tell you how to get it done. We're going to follow the advice of the people who are building homes and talk to the people who have lived experience with housing needs.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
This from the minister who admitted at committee that his housing plan doesn't actually build homes. Their plan funds bureaucracy and photo ops. And the more the Liberals spend, the less they build and the more Canadians have to pay. Since this Prime Minister started giving hundreds of millions of dollars to city politicians, housing starts are down. They're down 10% in Ottawa, 15% in Winnipeg, and down 20% in Vancouver and Toronto. So why won't the government adopt our common sense plan to build the homes by axing the tax?
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, a point of clarification. Housing starts this year are actually up year over year, but up tens of thousands over the last time the Conservatives were in office, when their current leader actually had responsibility for the agency that manages housing in this country. But, Mr. Speaker, to drive home the point that is most essential here, when they came up with a new idea on housing, they said they are going to pay for it by cutting programs that build middle-class and low-income housing for families right across this country. They want to cut housing, they want to cut health care, they want to cut supports to families, and that is completely unacceptable.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 9 years, the Liberal bloc isn't worth the cost of housing. The Liberal bloc has doubled the cost of rent, mortgage payments, and down payments. The federal sales tax adds $50,000 to the cost of houses that cost $1 million. Common sense Conservatives will axe the federal sales tax on new homes. For an $800,000 home, that means buyers will save $40,000. That's $2,200 per year in mortgage payments. The Liberals, supported by the Bloc, will they axe the GST on housing, or will they continue to fund programs that only deliver photo ops? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, during a rare press conference, the Conservative leader gave an honest answer about his plan to make cuts. He said, we are going to cut programs two for sure, and others that are underway. Under the Conservatives, Canadians will have fewer homes built more slowly. They'll have more costly visits to the dentist, later retirements, and families will have fewer supports. These cuts are completely unacceptable. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' housing advisor said this morning that the Liberals' photo ops plan, the plan to accelerate home building, is useless and inefficient. You know, we've always assumed in Quebec that young people would be able to dream of having a home, but unfortunately, after 9 years of the Liberal bloc, the boss of Desjardins has confirmed that young people are going to have to wait 10-15 years longer than their parents before becoming homeowners. They won't be young anymore by the time they can afford a house. We need to get going. A generation is waiting. When will the Liberal bloc accept our common sense proposal to axe the GST on new homes? The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Economic Development. Once again, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party is giving a clear example of how, for everything they want to put in place, they're going to make a cut somewhere else. So, healthcare, social programs, and now today they're saying that they're going to cut the housing accelerator. Mr. Speaker, how can this member who comes from Quebec tell the government of Quebec that he wants to cut 8,000 affordable social homes in Quebec? Because that's what he's just told Quebecers today, Mr. Speaker. I would invite honourable members, if they wish to ask questions, to please put their name on the lists. And the Speaker will be very happy to recognize them. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Everyone in Quebec is worried about our ability to welcome so many asylum seekers. But the number of asylum requests might go up because there are elections coming up in the United States in 8 days, and Trump has promised, as he said yesterday in New York, that as of day one, he'll launch the biggest program of deportation in the history of the country. He said he would deport up to 18 million people. Many Americans are very worried about this, but it should also worry the federal government. Does the government have a plan if migration from the United States suddenly becomes a flood? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Yes. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. If people are afraid of being deported by Trump, they might wish to leave the United States. They could be many to consider going north instead of south. And remember, the last time that Trump promised deportations, it started off what we saw at Roxham Road, and we're still living with the consequences of that 7 years later. Governing means planning. It's not just saying yes. So without assuming what the results of the election will be, can the government please reassure us that there's a plan in case there's a massive increase in the number of asylum seekers, and not just say yes? The Honourable Minister of Immigration Citizenship. Well, once again, Mr. Speaker, yes, we have a plan. The reality is that we've always managed the border with the United States, and it'll continue to be that way after the upcoming election.
The Honourable Member from Vancouver East.
Abortion care is under threat in Canada. Women don't want more liberal talking points. They want protection. Women and gender diverse people are seeing hateful anti-choice rhetoric creep into Parliament, spread by the Conservatives under their leaders' watch. That's right. Clinic 554 closed in New Brunswick, and abortion care across Canada has been chipped away at. So while the Liberals' words are nice, their lack of action is dangerous. Yeah. Will the Liberals stop their grandstanding and start making sure every person in Canada has equal access to abortion care?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, absolutely. That's exactly what we're doing and working with provinces and territories to make sure that the investments that we have in sexual health are there to make sure that women have access to an abortion. That's why we're advancing the work we're doing on pharmacare to make sure that women have both the contraception and access that they need. But on the point, and this is an extremely important point, when the Conservatives have such a huge number of people in their caucus who are anti-choice, who are standing up against women's rights, we have to call that out. A woman has full autonomy and right over her body. There is no member of this legislature or anybody who should claim to have authority over a woman's body.
The honourable member from North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, it's very hard to implement a right when the Liberals don't assure access. Women are scared. They're seeing Conservatives attack their right to choose. Meanwhile, the Liberals have allowed Conservative premiers to chip away at abortion care, making it nearly inaccessible in some provinces. When women and gender-diverse Canadians are sick of hearing these pretty words from the Liberals, and they sure don't want their health care in the hands of the Conservatives. They want their right to choose to be protected. Will the Liberals support the NDP in making sure abortion care is fully accessible for all?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
You know what puts women's right to abortion care at risk, Mr. Speaker? A Conservative caucus over there with a third of their members having been greenlit by anti-choice organizations across this country, members across the aisle who have voted consistently for backdoor anti-abortion legislation, and a leader that will not stand up for the rights of women in this country. That's what's putting the risks of women's health at great jeopardy in this country, and we're not going to stand for it, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals just aren't worth the cost. Today, Hunger Count revealed more than 2 million Canadians went to a food bank in March, up 6% from the previous year, and food bank use has doubled since 2019, and a third of those relying on food banks are children, meaning millions of Canadian families can't feed their kids. The NDP Liberals increased the carbon tax 23%, leading to record-breaking food bank use. They're not done. They want to quadruple that tax. Will the Prime Minister end the suffering he has caused and call a carbon tax election?
And the misery.
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that we've been living through expensive times, and that's exactly why we've made investments in Canadians and their families. Investments like the Canada Child Benefit, Mr. Speaker, introducing the Canada Disability Benefit, increased investments in housing, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition has continued to oppose us at each and every step, and now has announced his plans to cut even further. We will fight for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Foothills.
I'm glad at least one Liberal minister understands Canadians are living in expensive times that their policies caused. But let me help her with her answer. Food insecurity in Canada is up 111%. 2 million Canadians went to a food bank in a single month. Food inflation is a staggering 37% higher in Canada than it is in the United States. The Parliamentary Budget Officer already confirmed what Canadians know: the carbon tax is all pain, no gain. Will the Prime Minister stop his tax tricks and give Canadians the treat of a carbon tax election this Halloween?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have known for a very long time that the Conservatives are crying crocodile tears when it comes to the most vulnerable in Canada. And today, the Conservative leader actually admitted it. He said, and I quote, "We're going to cut 2 programs for sure and more beyond that." So now we know they're going to cut childcare. They're going to cut the Canada Child Benefit. They're going to cut dental care. They're going to cut pharmacare. They're going to cut support for seniors. That is unacceptable. We won't let them do that.
Although the chair couldn't hear, there was some back and forth. I'm going to ask honourable members please not to take the floor unless recognised. The honourable member from Calgary, Forest Lawn.
After 9 years of the Liberal NDP government, they're not worth the cost or hunger. Food Banks Canada came out with a report that more than 2 million Canadians visited a food bank in March, a 6% increase from last year. 1 in 5 of those food bank users are workers, 70% are renters, and as Canadians' incomes decline, this government doubled housing costs and rent. Canadians' incomes are lower than they've ever been. And starving Canadians further that this woke NDP Prime Minister will quadruple their carbon tax scam. Why not just call a carbon tax election now and let Canadians decide?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is that everywhere in the world, the costs of living have been incredibly difficult to deal with. And the Conservative solution to cut the things that provide vulnerable people support will put them in a much worse position. And let me put it into clarity. The earlier question referenced the United States. Do you know in the United States that the life expectancy is 5 years lower? Did you know in the United States that the average citizen has 6 more years in illness and disease? That's what their cuts would bring. That's the truth of what they're offering, and that's why we oppose their agenda.
The honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
This is the health minister that brought scurvy back to Canada. And they don't want to talk about the 2 million Canadians that they sent into a food bank in a single month, a third of which are children. They don't want to talk about going down the path of their radical plan to quadruple the carbon tax when they know 1 in 4 Canadians are already skipping meals and 1 in 5 food bank users are workers. They also don't want to talk about the fact that their plan was to always double housing costs. Why don't they just do everyone a favor? Why don't these economic arsonists stop gaslighting Canadians and call a carbon tax election now?
The honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, what else is back? Tuberculosis, measles, syphilis. Why does this happen? It's because the slogan machines on the other side, diving deep into the threads on Reddit, are creating and spreading information that confuses the health landscape and means that things that we had long put behind us come back. We cannot afford the kind of misinformation and the kind of nonsense that they spin, not only because it is not true, but because it put lives at risk, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Peterborough-Kawartha.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. Today, Food Banks Canada released their 2024 hunger count, and the stats are heartbreaking and record-breaking. Over 2 million Canadians used a food bank in 1 month. 700,000 of those users in 1 month in Canada were children. And what's his Prime Minister's response? Well, he's going to drive up the cost of food even more by quadrupling the carbon tax. Canadians can't afford him. His caucus doesn't want him. So why doesn't he let Canadians decide what they want and call a carbon tax election?
The honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when Canadians are facing tough times, what should a government do? They should provide programs that provide supports to them, like the Canada Child Benefit, like making childcare more affordable, like dental care for seniors and vulnerable Canadians. But what is the Conservative plan? Well, it's to cut those programs. It's to take away the very supports that Canadians rely on when times are tough. Mr. Speaker, we know the Conservative plan, and it's to balance the books on the backs of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we won't stand for that. We're going to stand for Canadians. Thank you.
Very good.
The honourable member from Peterborough-Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians will not stand for that gaslighting. After 5 years, in the last 5 years, food bank usage has doubled. It is the highest in history. People who used to volunteer at the food bank are now lining up to use it. Food banks are running out of food in Canada. Mr. Speaker, please, for the love of God, let them call a carbon tax election. This Prime Minister doesn't seem to understand the human consequences of his policies, that when you tax the farmer who grows the food, the trucker who ships the food, you end up taxing the Canadian who has to buy the food into poverty. Enough. Call a carbon tax election.
The honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
$7,782 a year tax-free. That's the Canada Child Benefit that has helped lift over 450,000 children out of poverty. What that member is calling gaslighting is real money that's helping real Canadians. Who's doing the gaslighting, Mr. Speaker? It's the Conservative members of Parliament that want to sell slogans instead of solutions. It's them who say that they can fix things while cutting the services and the programs that Canadians rely on. We're going to do real things that help real people. That's what we do on this side of the House.
Beautiful!
Ask the honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon, please, to not take the microphone, not take the floor unless he's recognised by the Speaker.
The honourable member from Montcalm. On October 30th, Quebec will finally allow advanced requests for medical assistance in dying. And yet the health minister is still setting up roadblocks. Last week, he said that Quebec was moving too quickly, and he even suggested that it was possible that he might challenge the move. Mr. Speaker, Quebec isn't going too quickly. It's been preparing for years, and for years, patients like Sandra de Montigny have been fighting for this day. Will the minister cooperate instead of setting up roadblocks? The Honourable Minister of Health. Always, Mr. Speaker, we're always ready to cooperate, and on such a delicate subject as advanced requests, it's absolutely essential that we make sure that there is a national conversation, and also to make sure that our system is ready. We need to make sure that we take the time necessary with this subject, because it's absolutely essential to make sure that the right choice is made. The Honourable Member from Okan. October 30th is in 2 days, and the federal government is still denying access to end-of-life care. For months, 6 professional orders have been asking for the criminal code to be harmonized with Quebec's law. We're 2 days from the deadline, and because the federal government has done nothing, there are doctors who are worried about the legal limbo around this issue. Will the federal government modify the criminal code and stop endangering access to care for sick patients? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General. I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the member across the way and his hard work on this issue. What I want to note is what the Minister of Healthcare said a moment ago. We are very aware of what the government of Quebec wants to do. We are also aware that we need to consult all the other provinces to make sure that we move forward with a national consensus on this issue. That is the best way to move forward. It's the method that we've used so far. We'll continue to work this way. The Honourable Member from Okan. The Bloc Québécois isn't calling for preferential treatment in the criminal code. It's a way forward to make sure that there's a proper legal framework in place for end-of-life care. Our bill, C-390, would allow provinces that have set a law and which are ready to move forward without risk with advance request. It respects the rhythm that the provinces are working at. It shows respect for healthcare professionals and respect for patients who want to make decisions regarding their own body and their own care. The government's been dragging its feet for a year and a half. When will it act? The Honourable Minister of Health. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have, I really appreciate the work that my colleague across the way has done. I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's. It was very, very difficult for my family. I understand this subject. It's a truly delicate subject, and it's absolutely essential that there's a national conversation. And I need the time to speak with my counterpart in the provinces and territories and to make sure that the system is ready, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Battleford, Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are simply just not worth the cost. Low-income Canadians are now spending 80% of their income on housing and food. The NDP Liberals' housing and food inflation is forcing millions of Canadians to rely on food banks. Still, this Liberal government is hell-bent on continuing to increase the cost of groceries by their punishing carbon tax. Will the Prime Minister give Canadians the carbon tax election that they so desperately need?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're making investments to help support families and children across this country. We've seen almost 1 million families who have benefited from our $10 a day national child care program. We've seen 3.5 million families who are receiving our Canada Child Benefit each and every month, providing much-needed support. We've seen CCB help lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. These are investments that we're making on this side of the House to ensure that we're there for Canadians and families.
The Honourable Member from Battleford, Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, that Liberal government is pushing Canadians to the brink, and they should be ashamed of their carbon tax fixation and that it has made life's basic necessities unaffordable. Housing costs have doubled, and food bank usage has soared past 2 million visits per month. It has gotten so dire that 30% of food banks are now running out of food. Mr. Speaker, It's quite simple. Will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so that Conservatives can offer Canadians some relief?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
It's getting a little bit difficult to take anything seriously that comes from that side of the House. If there was an actual volition to address child poverty, maybe they wouldn't have sent checks to millionaires and then taxed that money back. If there was an actual volition to address child food security, maybe they would get behind the National School Food Program. All they know is cuts. And what does that mean? That means cuts to taxes if you're rich and cuts to services if you have less. That's not what we stand for on this side of the House. We'll continue to fight for Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, and Canadians are hurting. This government has made life miserable for Nova Scotians with their crushing carbon tax that has increased food prices by 23%. And of course, on top of that, they plan to quadruple the carbon tax. What's the result? 53% more Nova Scotians are going to food banks now than 5 years ago. Almost 40,000 Nova Scotians rely on food banks every month, 12,000 of whom are children. Will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, it is extremely difficult to take a question of that nature from a Conservative member who himself goes on trips worth tens of thousands of dollars, sipping $1,700 bottles of champagne, while at the same time comes to Ottawa so he can oppose policies that give free food to kids in school.
Hear, hear.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, do you know how many people need help from food banks simply to eat? Just guess a number. That number is 2 million people, Mr. Speaker. That's an increase of 90% in 5 years. While people go hungry and community groups collapse, the Liberals aren't doing anything. Happy with their results. When will they have the courage to take on the ultra-rich who are stuffing their faces while people are starving? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to say we need to have courage and heart. My colleague is right to insist on the hardships many families are living through, including in my riding. That's why we have to have heart. And to have heart is supporting the school food program, which my honourable colleague voted for. Why are the Conservatives against breakfast clubs in schools, associations in my riding that feed children every single day? Why do the Conservatives call them bureaucratic?
From Port Moody, Coquitlam.
From Halifax to Port Moody, Coquitlam, all Canadians should be able to get where they need to go on public transit. But for people living with disabilities, public transit often comes with barriers. The Liberals told people with disabilities they'd make sure cities had funding for accessible transit. But just like with every Liberal promise, it's been delayed and forgotten. Will the Liberals finally deliver the promised funding for accessible public transit, or will they keep leaving persons with disabilities behind?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister for
Mr. Speaker,
Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
For her question. It's important that we make investments in public transit because we know the disproportionate impact it has on low-income families, on seniors, and yes, Canadians living with disabilities. We're moving forward with what will be the largest investment in the history of this country when it comes to public transit. This includes new baseline funding that will provide long-term, reliable allocations of funding to municipalities that will be made available, information will be made available to those partners over the next number of weeks. We are also launching large regional plans to allow massive expansions and significant new investments in active transportation, zero-emissions vehicles, and yes, transit systems that will be accessible to make sure that every Canadian has the ability to navigate their needs in their community.
The Honourable Member from Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, foreign interference poses a real threat to Canadians and our democracy. In this context, it's alarming that all but one of the opposition leaders obtained their security clearance. I have a simple question for the leader of the Conservative Party. When is he going to get his security clearance, address risk within his own party, and put...
I'm just going to make sure that the Honourable Member has 17 seconds left on the clock, but as you know, questions in question period need to be directed toward the administration of government. The honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, foreign interference poses a real threat to Canadians and our democracy. In this context, it's alarming that all but one of the opposition leaders obtained their security clearance. Mr. Speaker, to the federal government, what are we doing to ensuring that the security of our democracy is protected and ensuring that all opposition leaders get their security?
The Honourable Order. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
As my colleague from Vaughan Woodbridge said, foreign interference poses a real threat for Canada's national security. Foreign actors want to create uncertainty in our institutions. It's time for all of us to take foreign interference seriously and stop the spread of that uncertainty.
I'm going to ask all colleagues, please. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Justice from the top.
Mr. Speaker, as my colleague pointed out, foreign interference poses a real threat to Canada's national security. Foreign actors want to create uncertainty in our institutions. It's time for all of us to take foreign interference seriously and stop the spread of that uncertainty. This includes the Conservative leader. Once again, I have a simple message for him in three-word phrases that the leader of the Conservative Party is sure to understand. It's time to get the clearance, take the briefing, protect the country.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, they are not worth the cost of housing. They doubled rent, doubled mortgage payments, doubled down payments, and homeless encampments have opened in record numbers across Canada. Most young adults believe they will never afford a home. The federal GST adds a staggering cost to home costs, and the Common Sense Conservatives said today that we will axe the federal sales tax on new homes sold. For example, on an $800,000 house, this will save home buyers $40,000. Wow. Will the NDP Liberals axe the federal tax on housing, or will they continue to fund their housing photo op programs?
The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question. It's interesting because she represents a part of Kelowna. I was in Kelowna a year ago last week to announce the Housing Accelerator Fund would be contributing $31.5 million to her community. What her leader actually announced this morning is that he's going to cut that fund. She is now in the awkward position of defending an increase of taxes to her constituents of $31.5 million. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're going to advocate for programs that get homes built, not for cuts to the communities that we represent, which is simply shameful.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' own housing advisors said this morning that the Liberals' photo op fund, the so-called Housing Accelerator Fund, is either pointless or ineffective. And this government has spent billions of dollars. And in fact, housing starts are down by Canada's two largest cities, 20% in Vancouver and Toronto each. Under this NDP Liberal government, housing costs have doubled, rising faster than any other G7 country. And this is a made-in-Canada issue. In 2015, it took 39% of the average Canadian's income to cover home ownership costs, and now it's 60%. Conservatives will axe the federal tax on new homes over $1 million. Will the government listen? And
the Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague is very proud to stand beside her leader who's advocating that he's going to raise taxes by $31.5 million on ratepayers in Kelowna. 1 year ago, last week, I personally announced, where I shared with the Council, including the former Conservative Member of Parliament for Kelowna, that they were grateful for this money that was going to help them build homes more quickly. In this House, it is unbelievable to me that any Member of Parliament would listen to their constituents at home, come to Ottawa, and demand that Ottawa take money money from them. We are going to advance programs that build homes and support communities. It is unthinkable that a member would come and oppose money for the...
The honourable member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, I'm having a hard time listening to the Liberal Housing Minister defend policies from his government that have failed an entire generation of Canadians from our generation who dream of owning a home one day. He continues to talk about the Housing Accelerator Fund, but the Liberals' own housing advisor describes this fund as nothing more than a heist of tax dollars flowing from the feds to the municipalities.
That's right.
We know the NDP Liberals have turned their backs on a generation of Canadians. When will they stop overtaxing housing so young Canadians can buy a home?
Not good question. The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to me how often I see the Canadian Conservatives borrow their policy positions from right-wing populists in the United States.
Yes,
that might be where this particular member learned to advocate for programs that would cut affordable housing. Perhaps it was when he was chatting with his roommate at Yale Law School that he learned how to oppose programs that were going to provide birth control to Canadian women. Maybe it's his engagement in the United States that causes him to deal with the policies to legalize assault-sire firearms. Mr. Speaker, in this House, on this side of the House, we will advocate for policies that build more homes more quickly, not oppose them at every turn.
The honourable member from Durham.
It's no surprise that this Liberal housing minister continues to turn his back on a generation of Canadians because he's clearly not focused on his job. He wants to talk about what's happening in other countries. Let's talk about what's happening in our country, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
The last time Conservatives were in power, houses cost half of what they cost right now. Currently today, under this Liberal government, nearly 39% of the total taxes on new homes in Ontario are going to politicians and bureaucrats in Ottawa. When will this government agree with Conservatives and end the federal GST on housing so young Canadians can...
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what we will never agree with. We will never agree to the Conservative agenda of cuts and austerity. Cuts that will hit the most vulnerable hardest. And Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives, they've been trying to hide their true colors from Canadians. But today, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader, he made a mistake. And he admitted what he really intends to do. I'm going to quote him. We're going to cut 2 programs for sure, and more beyond that. So the question today is, what are they going to cut next? And we know it, everything that Canadians...
L'honorable député de Rivière.
The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, one of the most powerful and dangerous criminal groups are the Arab Power Group, the 2 leaders of which are locked up in prison. And yet it is from federal penitentiaries, that Younes Aitaki, the leader of the criminal group, and Sylvain Kabouchi, as number 2, run their operations. Arsons, protection rackets, murder. Nothing stops these new criminal organizations, especially not being in federal prison, apparently. Can the minister explain how gangs that sow terror and death in the streets of Montreal can be run from federal prisons? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, of course I share my colleagues' concerns. These are concerns that are shared by everyone in this House. I was able to meet union representatives and Correctional Services Canada officials, so we could talk about extra technology that we could implement and add to those that already exist to make sure that examples like my colleague do not happen. We are also working with the Quebec Correctional Service and Minister Bonnardel to give them these tools as well. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, according to Kingpin Gregory Woolley, who was himself murdered in the parking lot of a community health centre in the presence of his wife and their child, the Arab Power Group is out of control and the next gang war will be a bloodbath. The leaders are in prison and they have nothing to lose, and yet they run their criminal operations from cell phones that are smuggled into federal prisons. We know it The government knows it. The media reports it. How is it that notorious criminals still have access to phones in prison? Why isn't the minister doing anything about it? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, our colleague knows full well that the government is doing a lot for this. We've invested in technology. I myself went to a federal prison in Quebec, and I saw the technology that exists. I saw how we can stop drones from reaching prisons. Of course, we won't talk about the implemented technology because the information is not public, because that would give criminal gangs information to circumvent our measures. We will continue to invest in these technologies, and we will do everything that is necessary to protect people in prisons and outside. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the Liberal bloc is proving every day that it is not worth the cost of housing. The Liberal bloc doubled rents, mortgage payments and down payments. Only the common-sense Conservatives will eliminate the federal sales tax on new homes. That's $40,000 in savings or $2,200 a year in mortgage payments on an $800,000 home. Mr. Speaker, will the bloc-supported Liberals have the courage to abolish the federal sales tax on housing, or will they continue to fund their photo-op programmes? The Honourable Minister for Tourism. Mr. Speaker, I have a question for my dear colleague across the way. What will he answer to Quebecers when he says that to gain access to property, he and his party will cut social and affordable housing programs? What will his answer be for Quebecers when he will have to announcement that he will cut the 8,000 social housing units in his riding? On this side of this House, we give access to housing, but we give a roof to the most vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, under the previous Conservative government, our leader built 195,000 housing units. At the time, the proportion of a family's average income spent on housing was 39%. Today, it is 60%, Mr. Speaker. The Liberals' failed housing policies have ruined Canadians' purchasing power. Mr. Speaker, the $8 billion Liberal programs have doubled the cost of rents, mortgages and down payments in 9 years. When will the Liberals and the Bloc call an election to finally give Canadians affordable housing? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague perhaps doesn't know this yet. He keeps talking about affordable housing. Perhaps he should check the statistics. The answer given to information asked last year, 6 affordable housing units that the Conservative leader built when he was housing minister throughout the country. So I'd like to ask him how only 6 were built. But these 6 housing units can't even be found. We've been trying to find them. We can't find them, Mr. Speaker. It beggars belief. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner has reported there were allegedly only 113 privacy breaches at the Canada Revenue Agency between the years of 2020 and 2024. But CBC Radio-Canada reports that the number has risen to more than 31,000 security breaches directly affecting 62,000 Canadian taxpayers. The CRA now claims to have issued payments totaling $190 million in connection with confirmed cases of fraud since 2020. The Minister has tried to hide this information from the public and parliamentarians. Will she allow Canadians to recoup this $190 million? The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd like to say that fraud is completely unacceptable and that we have undertaken measures to fight it. The CRA is a target of choice because within the agency there's a lot of personal information and benefits are processed, tax returns are processed, but our systems are robust, Mr. Speaker. The agency has methods to protect, detect and block attempts of fraud. And every time there is an attempt that is detected, the person involved is noted and is informed. So we are making every effort to fight the situation. The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, over 30 years ago, the Supreme Court of Canada established the right to abortion in Canada in a safe way for their reproductive health. But today I'm concerned. I'm concerned because Conservative MPs continue to put forth petitions and bills. Some are even going to Florida to anti-choice rallies. It's not their business, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister of Economic Development today reaffirm the government's commitment to supporting women's reproductive health and women's rights as a whole? The Honourable Minister for Tourism. Mr. Speaker, when we talk about the right of women to choose, women are concerned from coast to coast to coast. I would like to commend the courage of the MP for Richmond Athabasca, who unveiled the Conservative Party's hidden agenda. He said, "I've seen a rise in the number of pro-life MPs within the organisation, strong members who influence policy. One of the Conservatives' hidden agendas is to elect anti-choice candidates and adopt anti-choice laws. On this side of the House, we're protecting the right of women, and we reject anti-choice candidates. That is what it looks like to defend women truly."
The Honourable Member from Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. In the latest scandal to hit the Canada Revenue Agency, over 60,000 taxpayers had their personal private information hacked. Not only are these individuals' information floating around on the internet, it also costs taxpayers money. Over $190 million have been improperly paid to scam artists because of privacy breaches at Revenue Canada. Wow. Will the minister get information, call in the RCMP about this privacy breach, and so that taxpayers can be repaid?
Minister Revenu National. The Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fraud is completely unacceptable. We agree on this, and our government is undertaking necessary measures. The agency, is a choice of target. There's a lot of personal information, many benefits are administered, tax returns as well. But the agency systems are solid. And when there is fraud attempts, we can inform the person who's been affected. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Unifor Local 1541 has been without a contract since March of 2023, and they've been on strike for almost 6 months. The employer has called Canadian workers lazy, refused to negotiate a wage increase, refused to bargain, and is effectively trying to bust the union. The union met with this NDP Liberal minister almost 2 months ago and took the unprecedented step of asking the minister to intervene. His response, crickets. Why is this NDP Liberal minister abandoning Unifor Local 1541?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Labour and for Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, the government, of course, is monitoring the situation closely, indeed daily. Mediators are working with the parties and available to assist at any time, and we urge them to continue their efforts to reach agreements. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission will continue to monitor this company for regulatory compliance to ensure the safety of workers, the public, and the environment. The facility remains secure. There have been no changes to the security of the site. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we will not let workers down, and we've made it repeated in treaties to the owner to return to the bargaining table.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
I can tell the Unifor workers at Local 1541 are going to be absolutely inspired by that heartfelt response from this NDP Liberal minister. Why are these NDP Liberals never responsible for anything, Mr. Speaker? 2 million Canadians using a food bank? Not our fault. Violent thugs out on bail? It's the province's fault. A local employer trying to bust a union? There's nothing we can do but read these talking points. If these NDP Liberals aren't responsible for anything and they can't fix anything, why don't they get out of the way and let a common sense Conservative government fix their mess?
The Honourable Minister for Labour and for Seniors.
We'll take no lessons from this right-to-work Conservative Party in terms of labor relations in Canada. The people who've stood up repeatedly to vote to remove power from unions, to force unions to reveal their financial statistics, and also to make sure that unions find it hard to certify in workplaces. These union-busting Conservatives will give us no lessons. I work daily with my colleague from Canada Carleton on this issue, and we will make sure that these workers get the negotiations and the contract that they deserve.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, we know that actors like Russia, China and India have attempted to interfere in Canada. Recently, the RCMP revealed that agents linked to the Indian government are involved in serious criminal activities in Canada.
I'm going to ask the honourable member from Grand River Miramichi to please not speak out and to allow the question to be asked as the Speaker had recognized the honourable member. I'll ask the honourable member from Davenport to start from the top.
Mr. Speaker, we know that actors like Russia, China and India have attempted to interfere in Canada. Recently, the RCMP revealed that agents linked to the Indian government are involved in serious criminal activities in Canada, including extortion and a murder of a Canadian citizen. It is time for all political party leaders to put country before party. My question for the government House Leader is, why won't the Leader of the Opposition do the right thing and join all opposition leaders and get a security clearance so he can act on foreign interference and protect Canadians?
Right on, Judy. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Davenport for that really important question when it comes to protecting our national security. Mr. Speaker, when Canadians send us here, they think that we're going to do one thing, and that's putting the national security of Canada first and putting Canadians first. Mr. Speaker, every leader of a party in this place has received their security clearance except for the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. The question is why? What is he hiding? What is he trying to protect? And why is he putting himself and his party ahead of the security of Canadians?
The honourable member from Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, under this Liberal government, multi-billion-dollar companies feel emboldened to use shady tactics to rip off Canadians. After this government rubber-stamped the Rogers takeover of Shaw, they promised lower costs but have snuck in price hikes for Canadians. The Liberals have done nothing to protect people. Instead, they rewarded Rogers with over $165 million in federal money. Rogers must be put on notice, reverse the cuts, or be banned from federal contracts. Will the Liberals have the courage to do it? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government's top priority from day one is making life more affordable for Canadians, and we're focused on increasing competition and lowering prices in the telecom sector. Since 2023, we're holding companies like Rogers accountable by eliminating switching fees and attacking extra and unnecessary fees, so Canadian consumers are empowered to find a plan that works for them. On this side of the aisle, we're standing up for Canadian consumers by helping them regain their negotiating power. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, it has been reported that CBC Radio Canada handed out $18 million in bonuses to executives in 2024. That's quite the situation. Executives are receiving multi-million-dollar bonuses, whilst hundreds of employees are losing their jobs. Yet the public broadcaster is demanding ever greater subsidies year after year to do its job. All this is damaging the reputation of CBC Radio Canada and all its workers. My question to the Prime Minister is simple. Does he agree with these bonuses? And, if not, what does he intend to do to put an end to them? The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for Richmond, Athabasca, for his question, but also for his courage in denouncing the Conservative Party of Canada and its positions when it comes to the right of women to choose. I would also like to remind him that CBC Radio Canada is an arm's-length organisation that manages its own budget, and that is the reason for which we've created a society where the government, including the potential Conservative government, will not be able to butt into their decision-making.
chers collègues, je désire
Honourable colleagues, I wish to let you know that the volume of earpiece